In the small frontier town of Millbrook, the three sisters found themselves in the most frightening situation of their young lives. Emma, who was 19, held her younger sister's close as they stood in the crowded saloon. Grace, 16, trembled beside her, while little Rose, only 12 years old, buried her face in Emma's worn dress. The saloon smelled of old tobacco and spilled drinks. Wooden tables were scattered round the room, and dim oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the walls. Men sat drinking from large glasses, their voices getting louder with each sip. The sisters stood near the bar, feeling more alone than they had ever felt before. Their parents had passed away from illness the previous winter, leaving behind only debts and heartbreak. Emma remembered how her father had worked so hard on their small farm, and how her mother had sewn clothes late into the night to earn extra money. But it was never enough. When the sickness came, there was no money for medicine or doctors. After the funeral, men in dark suits came to their little cottage. They carried papers and spoke in cold voices about money owed to the bank. Emma tried to explain that they were just three young girls with nowhere to go. But the men did not care. They took the cottage, the furniture, and even her mother's wedding ring. The cruel town officials had taken their small cottage to pay what was owed. Emma had begged them for more time, promising to work and pay back every penny. But they laughed at her and said three girls could never earn enough money. Now, with nowhere to turn and no family to help them, the sisters faced an unthinkable fate. For weeks, they had been living in a cold barn behind the general store. The owner, Mr. Taunton, had felt sorry for them and let them sleep there in exchange for Emma cleaning his shop. But when other townspeople complained about having homeless girls round, he told them they had to leave. That was when the men from the saloon found them. They promised the sisters food and shelter. But Emma knew there was something wrong with their smiles. When they brought the girls to the saloon that evening, Emma realized the terrible truth about what these men planned to do. The saloon was filled with rough men who had been drinking all evening. They wore dirty clothes and had mean looks in their eyes. Some had traveled from far away after hearing there would be something special happening at the saloon tonight. They shouted and laughed as if the three frightened girls were nothing more than items to be bought and sold. Emma felt her heart breaking as she tried to be brave for her sisters. She remembered how her mother used to tell them stories about brave princesses who protected their kingdoms. But Emma did not feel brave now. She felt small and scared and angry that the world could be so cruel to three girls who had done nothing wrong. Grace stood close to Emma, her whole body shaking with fear. She had always been the quiet sister, preferring to read books rather than talk to people. Now she wished she could disappear into one of her stories where good always won over evil. Her green eyes darted round the room, looking for any way they might escape. Little Rose buried her face deeper into Emma's dress, trying to block out the scary sounds around them. She was too young to fully understand what was happening, but she knew it was bad. She missed her parents terribly and wished they were there to protect her and her sisters. The saloon owner, a fat man with a red face, stood behind the bar counting money. He seemed happy about all the attention his establishment was getting. He poured drinks for the men and encouraged them to bid higher and higher. To him, this was just business. Emma looked round the room desperately, hoping to see at least one kind face among all the cruel ones. But every man there seemed interested only in what they might gain from the sisters' misfortune. Some argued loudly about who should get which sister. Others made jokes that made Emma feel sick to her stomach. "We must stay together," Emma whispered to Grace and Rose. "No matter what happens, we are family. We will find a way through this." She tried to sound confident, but her voice shook with emotion. She squeezed her sister's hands tightly, hoping to give them strength even though she felt so weak herself. The noise grew louder as more men joined in. They pushed closer to get a better look at the sisters, making crude comments and laughing at their fear. Emma closed her eyes and prayed for a miracle, holding her sisters tighter than ever before. She thought about her parents and wondered if they were watching from heaven, wishing they could help their daughters in that dark moment. She wondered if anyone in the world would show them kindness. Had God forgotten about 3 orphaned girls? Was there no one left who cared about doing what was right? Emma felt tears rolling down her cheeks, but she tried to hide them from her sisters. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance and rain began to fall. The storm was getting stronger, but inside the saloon, the men paid no attention to the weather. They were too focused on the business at hand. Little did they know, help was already on its way through the stormy night. The saloon doors suddenly swung open with great force. A cold wind rushed into the room, making the oil lamps flicker and dance. Rain poured in from the storm outside as a tall figure stepped into the smoky room. Water dripped from his long coat onto the wooden floor, creating small puddles round his boots. The man was soaked from his long ride, but his eyes were kind and determined. He stood in the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light inside the saloon. His hair was wet and plastered to his head, and his clothes were muddy from the hard journey through the storm. But there was something about the way he carried himself that made everyone in the room take notice. His name was James Wellington, a respected rancher from the neighboring valley. He owned one of the largest cattle ranches in the territory, stretching across thousands of acres of green grassland. James was 42 years old, with gentle brown eyes and calloused hands that showed he was not afraid of hard work. He had heard whispers of what was happening in Millbrook from his ranch foreman, Tom, who had been in town buying supplies earlier. That day, Tom had returned to the ranch with a troubled expression, telling James about 3 orphan sisters who were in terrible danger. The story had made James so angry and sad that he could not sleep that night. James was known throughout the region as a man of honor who helped those in need. When drought had struck 2 years earlier, he had given free cattle to struggling families. When the school teacher had fallen ill, he had paid for a replacement teacher out of his own pocket. People said that James Wellington had never turned away anyone who asked for help. As soon as Tom finished telling him about the sisters, James had saddled his strongest horse and ridden through the dangerous storm to reach the town. The rain had been so heavy that he could barely see the road ahead. Lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder crashed overhead. But James pushed forward, knowing that 3 innocent girls needed help. The room fell silent as James walked forward. Every conversation stopped, and every glass was set down on the tables. The men who had been shouting and laughing just moments before now stared at this unexpected visitor. His boots echoed on the wooden floor as he approached where the sisters stood. Emma looked up at him with fearful eyes, not knowing what to expect from yet another stranger. She had learned not to trust men who seemed friendly, because they often wanted something in return. Her heart was beating so fast she thought everyone in the room could hear it. Grace pressed closer to her side, while little Rose peeked out from behind Emma's dress. James stopped a respectful distance away from the sisters. He could see the fear in their eyes, and it broke his heart. These were just children, he thought to himself. How could anyone treat children this way? He took off his wet hat and held it in his hands, showing respect. The saloon owner stepped forward, rubbing his hands together greedily. He saw James's fine clothes and expensive boots, and his eyes lit up with the hope of making more money. Well, he said with a fake smile, another bidder joins us tonight. What do you say, mister? These are fine young ladies, as you can see." James looked at the saloon owner with disgust. His jaw tightened, and his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Emma thought he might hit the fat man. But instead, James took a deep breath and spoke in a voice that filled the entire room. "I will pay double whatever anyone here has offered," James announced in a clear, strong voice. "But these young ladies will come with me as free citizens, not as property. They deserve dignity and respect." The men in the saloon began to grumble and complain. Some of them had traveled a long way and spent their last coins hoping to get something for their money. Others were simply angry that their evening's entertainment was being spoiled by this stranger. One man with a thick beard stood up from his table. "Now, wait just a minute," he said loudly. "We were here first. You can't just walk in here and take over." Several other men nodded and made similar complaints. But none dared challenge James Wellington directly. His reputation for fairness was matched only by his reputation for protecting what was right. Stories were told throughout the territory about how James had once faced down 5 armed men who were trying to steal cattle from a widow's farm. He had never drawn his gun, but his courage and determination had sent the thieves running. The saloon owner looked nervous now. He had hoped to make easy money tonight, but he could see that James Wellington was not a man to be trifled with. "Well, I suppose if you're willing to pay double," he said uncertainly. James reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch heavy with gold coins. He placed it on the bar with a loud thump. "There's your money," he said coldly. "Now this business is finished." Then James turned to the 3 sisters with gentle eyes. His expression completely changed from stern to kind. "You are safe now," he said softly, speaking directly to Emma. "I have a large ranch with plenty of room, and my housekeeper Margaret will make sure you are comfortable. You owe me nothing except to live with hope again, for the first time in months." Emma felt tears of relief rather than fear. The Wellington Ranch was larger and more beautiful than the sisters had ever imagined. As their wagon rolled up the long dirt road that led to the main house, Emma, Grace, and Rose pressed their faces to the small window, staring in wonder at what they saw. Rolling green hills stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with cattle and horses that grazed peacefully in the afternoon sunshine. The ranch spread across the valley like a green carpet, with wooden fences marking different pastures where animals roamed freely. In the distance, mountains rose up against the blue sky, their peaks covered with white snow even in the warmer months. A clear stream ran through the property, its water sparkling as it wound between the hills. The main house was warm and welcoming, built from logs and stone that seemed to grow naturally from the land round it. It had a wide front porch with wooden chairs where people could sit and watch the sunset. The roof was made of red tiles, and smoke rose gently from a stone chimney. Flower gardens bloomed on either side of the front steps, filled with roses, daisies, and other colorful plants that Margaret tended with loving care. Margaret, the housekeeper, was waiting for them on the front porch. She was a motherly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She wore a clean apron over her simple brown dress, and her hands were folded in front of her as she watched the wagon approach. Margaret had worked for James Wellington for 15 years. Ever since his wife had died giving birth to their first child, she had helped him through his darkest days and had become like family to him. When James had sent word that he was bringing 3 orphan sisters to live at the ranch, Margaret had immediately begun preparing rooms and planning how to make the girls feel welcome and safe. She had prepared separate rooms for each sister, complete with clean clothes and warm beds. Each room had been decorated with care. with fresh flowers on the window sills and soft quilts on the beds that Margaret had sewn herself during the long winter evenings. There were new dresses hanging in the wardrobes, shoes that would fit properly, and even small personal touches like books and hair ribbons for girls who had known only hardship for so long. Such comfort felt like a dream. Emma touched the soft fabric of her new dress with trembling fingers, hardly believing it was real. Grace ran her hand over the smooth wooden surface of her bedside table, marveling at how clean and polished everything was. Little Rose bounced gently on her bed, amazed by how soft the mattress felt compared to the hard barn floor where they had been sleeping. At first, the sisters were cautious and afraid. They had learned not to trust easily after so much disappointment and betrayal. Emma worried that James might expect something in return for his kindness. She had heard stories of men who seemed generous at first but later demanded payment in ways that made her feel sick to think about. Emma would lie awake at night, listening to every sound in the house and wondering when the other shoe would drop. She kept their few belongings packed in a small bag under her bed, ready to grab her sisters and run if necessary. During meals, she barely ate. Too nervous to enjoy the delicious food that Margaret prepared, Grace barely spoke above a whisper. Even when Margaret or James asked her direct questions, she had always been shy, but the terrible experiences of recent months had made her retreat even further into herself. She moved through the house like a ghost, afraid to touch anything or make any noise that might anger their hosts. Little Rose often hid behind her older sisters whenever James entered a room. She would peek round Emma's skirt with wide, frightened eyes, ready to run at the first sign of danger. The trauma of losing her parents and nearly losing her sisters had made her afraid of all adult men, even one as kind as James appeared to be. But James was patient and understanding. He seemed to know exactly how the sisters were feeling, and he never pushed them to do anything they did not want to do. Instead, he showed them kindness through small, daily actions that slowly began to earn their trust. He made sure they had enough to eat, always asking Margaret to prepare their favorite foods once he learned what they were. He encouraged them to explore the ranch at their own pace, showing them the safe places to walk and the animals that were gentle enough to pet. Most importantly, he always spoke to them with respect, treating them as valued guests rather than charity cases. When Emma accidentally broke a plate while helping with dishes, James simply smiled and said, "Don't worry about it. Plates can be replaced, but people cannot." When Grace spilled milk on her new dress, he told her that clothes were meant to be worn and enjoyed, not kept perfect. When Rose had nightmares and cried in the middle of the night, he sat outside her door reading quietly until she fell back asleep, never making her feel ashamed of her fears. Slowly, the sisters began to heal. Emma discovered she had a talent for numbers and began helping James keep track of the ranch accounts. Grace showed a natural way with animals and started caring for the horses. Rose found joy in learning to read with Margaret by the fireplace. Each evening, week by week, their laughter returned. The ranch became a place of healing and hope. As the seasons changed, so did the three sisters. Spring turned to summer, summer to autumn, and autumn to winter, and with each passing month, Emma, Grace, and Rose grew stronger not just in body, but in spirit and confidence. The ranch had become their true home, and they began to contribute in meaningful ways that surprised even themselves. Emma discovered that she had a natural gift for working with numbers and money. What had started as simple help with adding up feed costs and cattle prices soon grew into something much more important. She spent hours each evening in James's study, carefully writing down every expense and income in large ledger books. Her handwriting was neat and clear, and she never made mistakes in her calculations. Emma's skill with numbers impressed everyone who saw her work. She helped James make the ranch more successful by keeping careful records and finding ways to save money. She noticed that they were paying too much for grain from one supplier and found a better deal with a farmer in the next valley. She realized that they could make more money by selling their cattle at a different time of year when prices were higher. Her intelligence and hard work earned the respect of everyone who met her. When the banker from town came to visit James about a loan, he was amazed to find that a young woman was handling all the ranch's financial records. "I have seen grown men with years of experience who cannot keep books this well," he told James with genuine admiration. Emma felt proud of her abilities in a way she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she understood that she was truly good at something important. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted her for so long began to fade away, replaced by confidence and purpose. Grace discovered her own special talent with animals, especially horses. What had begun as nervous visits to the stable grew into a deep understanding of how to communicate with these powerful creatures. She seemed to know instinctively what each horse was thinking and feeling. Grace became known throughout the valley for her gentle way with horses. She could calm even the most frightened animals with her patient touch and soft voice. When a horse had been hurt or frightened by cruel treatment, Grace would spend hours sitting quietly nearby, letting the animal learn to trust her presence. Local farmers began bringing their troubled horses to her for help. Word spread that there was a young woman at the Wellington Ranch who could work miracles with difficult animals. Men would ride for miles to ask Grace to look at a horse that refused to be ridden or a mare that would not let anyone near her foal. Grace never asked for money for her help, but the grateful farmers often brought gifts of fresh vegetables, homemade bread, or other useful things for the ranch. More importantly, they brought respect and recognition for Grace's unique abilities. She began to see herself not as a frightened girl who had nearly been sold in a saloon, but as someone with valuable skills that could help others. Young Rose, despite all she had endured, kept her loving heart and generous spirit. She had always been the most optimistic of the three sisters, and now that she felt safe and secure, her natural kindness began to shine through. She began teaching reading to the children of ranch workers who could not afford schooling. Rose set up a small classroom in the barn loft, with wooden crates for desks and slate boards for writing. She taught children of all ages, from tiny ones who were just learning their letters to teenagers who had never had the chance to go to school. Her patience seemed endless, and she celebrated every small success with genuine joy. Her kindness inspired everyone around her. The ranch workers loved Rose and would do anything to help her. They built better desks for her classroom, brought books from town, and even made sure the barn was heated during cold winter days so the children could continue their lessons. James watched the sisters grow with pride, but never took credit for their success. When visitors praised him for helping the three orphaned girls, he would shake his head and smile. "You had this strength inside you all along," he would tell them. "I simply provided a safe place for it to grow." He was genuinely amazed by how much the sisters had accomplished. They had taken the worst experience of their lives and used it to become stronger, kinder, and more determined to help others. James often told Margaret that saving the sisters had been one of the best decisions he had ever made, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because they had brought so much joy and purpose to the ranch. The sisters also began reaching out to help others in need. When they heard of families facing hardship, they would quietly provide food or assistance. They understood suffering in a way that many people could not, and they wanted to prevent others from experiencing what they had endured. Emma would use her knowledge of finances to help struggling farmers plan their budgets. Grace would donate her time to heal sick or injured animals for families who could not afford a veterinarian. Rose would teach reading to any child whose parents could not pay for school. Their reputation for kindness spread throughout the region, bringing hope to many people who had given up on finding help. The Wellington Ranch became known not just as a successful cattle operation, but as a place where people in trouble could find compassion and assistance. 3 years had passed since the terrible night in the saloon. The memories of that dark evening now seemed like they belonged to someone else's life. So much had changed for the three sisters. The Wellington Ranch had become known throughout the territory as a place where people in trouble could find help and hope. The ranch looked different now, too. New buildings had been added to house the various programs the sisters had started. There was a proper schoolhouse where Rose taught her classes, a special stable where Grace worked with injured horses, and an office building where Emma managed not just the ranch business, but also helped coordinate assistance for struggling families throughout the valley. Emma had married James in a ceremony filled with love and joy just 6 months earlier. The wedding had been held in the meadow behind the main house, with wildflowers decorating every table and the entire community invited to celebrate. Emma wore her mother's wedding dress, which Margaret had carefully altered to fit perfectly. Their union was built on mutual respect and shared values, proving that true love can grow from the seeds of kindness. What had begun as James's rescue of 3 desperate girls had slowly blossomed into deep affection and partnership. Emma and James worked together every day, making decisions about the ranch and their various charitable programs. She continued to manage the ranch business with skill and wisdom that impressed everyone who knew her. The ranch was now more profitable than it had ever been, thanks to Emma's careful planning and smart investments. But more importantly, it had become a source of good in the community, providing jobs for many families and help for those in need. Grace had started a program to train horses for people with disabilities, showing that gentleness could be more powerful than force. Her special stable housed horses that had been carefully selected and trained to work with people who had lost limbs in accidents or been born with conditions that made walking difficult. Her work brought healing to both animals and humans alike. Horses that had been considered too wild or damaged to be useful found new purpose under Grace's patient care. People who had been told they would never ride again discovered joy and freedom on horseback. Grace had become famous throughout the territory for her innovative methods and compassionate approach. One of her most successful cases was a young man named William, who had lost his leg in a farming accident. Grace had worked with him for months, teaching him how to balance and communicate with his specially trained horse. Now William could ride as well as anyone, and he helped Grace train other horses and teach other disabled riders. Rose, now 15 and full of confidence, had established a small school for children whose families could not afford education. Her classroom was filled with laughter and learning, the far cry from the frightened girl she had once been. The little barn loft had been expanded into a proper schoolhouse with real desks, a blackboard, and shelves full of books. Rose taught children, ranging in age from 5 to 16, adapting her lessons to meet each student's needs. Some of her former students had gone on to attend schools in larger towns, while others had learned enough to help their families with reading and writing. Rose's gentle patience and encouraging words had given many children opportunities they never would have had otherwise. The schoolhouse had become the heart of the community in many ways. Rose organized spelling and tests, reading competitions, and holiday celebrations that brought families together. Parents who had never learned to read themselves would sit in the back of the classroom during evening classes, learning alongside their children on a beautiful spring day. The sisters stood together on the hill overlooking their valley home, the same hill where Emma had once stood as a new bride. where Grace had first learned to work with the wild horses, and where Rose had dreamed of building her school. Now all their dreams had come true and grown beyond what they had ever imagined possible. They had invited the whole community for a celebration of hope and second chances. Families came from miles round, bringing food for a huge picnic and stories of how the sisters had touched their lives. There were former students of Rose's school, families whose horses Grace had healed, and farmers whose businesses Emma had helped save through difficult times. The celebration was held in the same meadow where Emma and James had been married. Long tables were set up under the trees, covered with checkered tablecloths and loaded with food that everyone had contributed. Children ran and played while adults shared stories and laughter. As Emma addressed the gathered crowd, she spoke with strength and gratitude that amazed everyone who remembered the frightened girl from the saloon. We learned that even in our darkest moments, there are people who choose kindness over selfishness. One person's courage to do right can change everything. Grace stepped forward, her voice clear and confident as she added, "We discovered that we are stronger than we ever imagined, and that helping others helps us heal too. Every animal we help teaches us something new about patience and love." Rose, no longer little but still the most optimistic of the three, smiled brightly as she concluded, "Every ending can be a new beginning if we choose hope over fear. We were once three scared girls with nowhere to go, and now we have a home, a family, and the chance to help others find their way too." The crowd cheered loudly, clapping and calling out words of support and love. The sisters embraced, tears of joy running down their faces, knowing their story would inspire others for generations to come. Their legacy would live on in every child Rose taught, every horse Grace healed, and every family Emma helped through hard times. The end.